Hello everyone, thanks for taking the time to join us today. My name is Michael Dockery, I'm the Chief Strategist of Design Industries, and welcome to the second in our series of Meet the Marketplace vendor, where we get to meet the top vendors from around the world, in this case from sunny Wollongong, but they're going to tell us about some of the amazing tools that we can add to the Atlassian tool suite to empower teams and just generally make them more awesome. So before we start, just like to let you know that the webinar is being recorded, so you're welcome to ask questions, but just be mindful, and also we'll enable some chat later, so just maintain privacy, because we'd like to publish this for everyone to find out more about what's going on. But feel free to jump in for the Q&A. Be allotting some time at the end of the sort of product presentations, where you're going to see a few products today for Q&A. Let's get going. So today we've got Sean and Teagan from Easy Agile. Sean's head of marketing, Teagan is head of product, and they've got lots to tell us. So Sean, would you like to take it away?
Great. Well, thanks so much, Michael, and everyone at Design Industries for having us today. It's really exciting to join your webinar and to share a little bit about the apps that we make right here in Australia. So I guess it's a bit of a unique one, isn't it, Michael? Because some of the marketplace partners, well, most of them, I guess, are based overseas, but this is probably unique to hear from an Australian app partner who sells apps on the marketplace. So it's really great to be here. The structure, as Michael mentioned, is I'm going to share a few slides and talk through why we created some of the apps that we've created and some of the agile practices that sit behind them. And then I'm going to hand over to Teagan, who's going to walk through how the products work in the everyday use, so how they actually work in Jira, and she's going to show us how to get set up and how your teams can actually start working better together, doing user story mapping, storing and managing user personas in Jira. And also then the second half of the webinar will go through Easy Agile Programs, which is our tool for PI planning if you're looking to scale up your agile presence and proceed to that team of teams level. So I'm going to get started by sharing my screen here. Hopefully you can all see that. And thanks again, Michael and Alice, for having us. It's really good to be here. And we're really looking forward to the Q&A sessions that we've got scheduled along the way too. So user story mapping in Jira, that's what we're going to start with this morning. And when we are working with Jira, Atlassian give us this wonderful screen called the Backlog View. And it's something that appears useful on the surface, but the more that we use it, it turns out to be something that we learn to loathe. And we've all experienced this dreaded flat backlog. There's normally thousands or hundreds of issues in these backlogs, aren't there? They're captured over years or even decades in some cases. All these business requirements and bright ideas, well, they pile up to form an impressive wall of everything we didn't do. And it's a little bit depressing. If you use Jira to track your work like we do and a lot of people do around the world, this is what it looks like. This is the backlog view. And this flat backlog, well, it's one of the most common practices really that agile software development teams use. It's one of the most common screens that these teams use to keep track of all of their bright ideas, all of their work, all of their priorities. And we've all contributed to them in the past. We've contributed to making them bigger, and eventually we all end up drowning in these massive lists of things that we never get around to doing. In its simplest form, a flat backlog, well, it's just a laundry list of stuff to do, but we hope that ultimately it'll provide some sort of value to our users or our customers, or that we hope one day will provide some sort of value. These ideas should be prioritized top to bottom. So we drag and drop things up and down based on how we're feeling that day or what our priorities are or which persona we're seeking to serve. If your team's working in Scrum, then the backlog is then split into future sprints or time boxes to provide a bit of an indication of what pieces of work, what issues, what user stories will be delivered and when. But a flat backlog by itself is a little bit rigid, isn't it? It's difficult to filter. It's quite difficult to prioritize, especially when you've got hundreds of issues in there. It's hard to scroll up and down and achieve any sense of perspective or context on what your ultimate goal is. And if you're like me, a little bit lazy, you end up just rewriting all your ideas again and again and putting them back at the top of the backlog because it's too hard to go back and find the old ones. All those old ideas sit there, dusty and lonely and untouched. So we know now that this flat backlog is a little bit broken, isn't it? So why do we keep them? Well, Atlassian agrees that this backlog is broken too. They actually say on their blog, once the backlog grows beyond the team's long-term capacity, it's okay to close the issues that the team will never get to. So straight from the mouth of Atlassian, they also agree that these things, they get out of date and they get a little bit unwieldy. So you've got my permission today to go ahead, and I'm sure you've got Teagan's permission as well. Go ahead and just delete all your team's backlogs. What's the worst that could happen? No.
We could just do a query, Sean, and we'll just go, show me any issue older than a year and we'll close it.
Yeah, absolutely. What could possibly go wrong? But in all seriousness, But in all seriousness, what if our teams actually had a better way to track their ideas, manage their work, and plan their sprints? What if we had a better way of doing this? Well, I think we do, and that's what we're going to share with you today. This is where the user story map comes in. So I want to propose to you that your new backlog, or what your new backlog should be, the replacement for your old flat backlog should actually be a user story map. So today, Teagan and I are going to show you how user story mapping can actually replace your flat backlog and how it proves to be a much better way of managing your team's work in Jira. So this is a bit of an illustration. Your flat backlog is this two-dimensional view, whereas your story map, it's more of a three-dimensional matrix. It stretches vertically, similar to what our flat backlog does, but it also stretches horizontally. And this small tweak actually makes a huge difference when it comes to planning our work. So what is a user story map? A user story map is a visualization of the journey a customer takes with a product. And it includes those activities and tasks that that user would typically complete. Usually, story mapping sessions are held at the beginning of a new project or a new initiative, so like a kickoff session. And a user story mapping session is held with a sole purpose of creating a shared understanding amongst the team. So if you've got a software development team looking to build a new app, a story mapping session is actually a great ceremony for everyone to come together and have a bit of a think about, what are we trying to achieve? Who is this app for? Let's get all our ideas down in one place. So the team will take into consideration things like who your customers are and how you should focus your time working on the stories that provide the most value for them. So the user story map is much more meaningful compared to just a shopping list of work. It allows for additional layers of context, additional layers of conversation, and also the planning element, that time element. The three key elements of a user story map are this. Number one is the epic level. This is the backbone. These are the customer touch points, and these sit across the top of the story map. The next level down is the story level. And these are the stories, the user stories, which support each of those customer touch points. And then there's another additional element to the story map. This third element is the sprint level. And this helps break down our stories into manageable chunks of work, usually into sections of times like sprints or releases. And user story mapping essentially converts that two-dimensional flat backlog into this three-dimensional matrix. And it gives us a way to say, okay, we're currently working on these user stories. We can visualize what part of the customer journey that these user stories are impacting. And we also get a view of when we're going to plan to deliver this work to our customers. So understanding at a basic level how what we're working on affects the customer can actually be a really important decision point for our teams. So just looking to summarize here, user story mapping helps us answer these key questions. By putting the focus back on the user, a story map ensures that the backlog contains work that adds real value for the customer and helps them achieve their goals. But it also makes our lives easier, doesn't it? A story map helps answer, why are we building these things? Who are we building for? Who really is the customer? What value will it provide them? And when do we expect to deliver this? That's the favorite question that our executive teams love to ask, isn't it? When are we going to see it? Traditionally, story mapping's been done in a room with a whiteboard, sticky notes, but this isn't really possible at the moment with distributed and virtual teams. But even when we did used to do it with sticky notes, it usually got a bit out of control. We'd end up losing the sticky notes, they'd fall off the wall, people would forget to take a photo, and it all got a bit messy. So more and more, we've had people over the years come and ask us, well, how do we make story mapping digital? How do we take it off the wall and share it with our teams who are usually working in Jira? Well, you can keep doing it with a whiteboard or sticky notes if you like, or you might want to give it a go using a digital tool like Easy Agile user story maps for Jira. And Teagan's going to walk us through what that looks like in a moment. But before that, I also wanted to mention another benefit of story mapping, and it's something I touched on in the previous slides. Story mapping helps our teams be more customer focused. And what we've done recently is we've released another app onto the Atlassian Marketplace called Easy Agile Personas. And Easy Agile Personas is a place where your teams can store your key buyer personas in Jira, and you can actually link your Jira issues with that customer persona or that customer avatar that you're trying to solve for. Now, this is really powerful because development teams can now see how the software that they're working on day to day actually impacts the real end customer and solves their problems. The story map can also be filtered by persona. So the two apps, Easy Agile User Story Maps for Jira and Easy Agile Personas for Jira, actually integrate with each other. And you can filter your story map based on your persona. And there's some additional functionality which Teagan's going to show us right now. So I'm going to hand over to Teagan to do a demo walkthrough of these apps. And then I think we're going to do some Q&A after that. So if you do have some questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or get ready to ask us after Teagan does this demo. Thanks, Teagan.
Thanks, Sean. I'll just share my screen now. Okay, great. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to walk you through what a flat backlog in Jira looks like transformed as a user story map, and then kind of touch on those key elements that Sean talked through around the story map backbone or the customer journey, and how we slice and dice the story map to visualize when we're going to deliver customer value on the story map. So what we're looking at here is a flat backlog, and I will admit that this is quite a neat backlog and is by no means a real representation of what a backlog would look like in your organization, certainly not ours. But I wanted to give you a bit of a view as to, you know, as soon as you plug user story maps in, what it would look like. So we've got our backlog here, sorry. We can open our epics panel. We can see the list of the epics that we've created on our backlog. And we can also see our sprint time boxes on the backlog as well. So if I head on over to my user story map, which is in your project sidebar, so a little bit of a caveat, a user story map has a one-to-one mapping with an agile board. So every board in your Jira instance will have access to its own user story map, and it's compatible for next-gen, Scrum, and Kanban boards. And you'll see that if you have any pre-existing data in your backlog, it's transformed into this three-dimensional view on the user story map. So I'm just going to walk through what we're seeing here together. So as Sean mentioned, along the top of our user story map, these are our epics. And these are the epics pulled directly from the board that our story map is sitting on top of. And so what we're looking at here, I've created my epics to represent my customer journey, and we're looking at a Hogwarts example here. So this is the customer journey of new and existing students at Hogwarts. So you'll see our first step is we'll receive a letter of offer by Al, then we'll have to purchase school supplies in Diagon Alley. We'll travel to Hogwarts by the Hogwarts Express. We'll have a welcome reception dinner. We'll be sorted into our houses. We'll have orientation in our common rooms, etc. I could go on. I love Harry Potter, but I won't do that to you all. But you can see how these epics have been ordered sequentially. So I'm trying to order them in the interaction that our customer will have with our product. Under each of these epics, we can see the user stories, the tasks, the bugs that have been linked to these epics in our backlog. So we've got here, you know, as a student, I want to visit Gringotts so that I can withdraw money. So these are all of our supporting stories to deliver on this customer journey step. These are all of the things that we need to do as a team to ensure that our customer can achieve this particular customer journey step. And so we can add new stories to the story map here as well, not just pull across the existing stories we created in our backlog. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I can quickly create new stories. And what that's done, as Sean mentioned before, the story map acts as a bit of a matrix. So by creating this user story beneath this purchase school supplies epic, I've automatically linked these user stories to this epic. And by scheduling them in the sprint 1 swim lane, I've also scheduled them into sprint 1 on my backlog. So it's this really quick one-to-one mapping between your JIRA data and what you do on the user story map. And that was a really important consideration when we built the tool, because a user story mapping session should be really fluid and quick. And we wanted to ensure that the tool reflected the physical practice as well. So Sean mentioned a little bit about personas, our newest app. And I wanted to show you how we would use the story map and the personas integration to make sure that we're prioritizing the work we put into each sprint based on the most value to our personas. So if I quickly, I'm going to jump across into the personas I've created for the project that this board is sitting in. And so a caveat here is that personas have a one-to-one mapping with a project. So any personas you create in a project will be shared with all of the boards that exist within that project. So I've created 3 personas here. I've got my new student, Ginny Weasley. I've got my existing student, Draco Malfoy, and I've got my headmaster, Dumbledore. I'm going to jump quickly into a persona just to show you what some of the fields are that you have to play with. So here I've inserted my persona name and archetype, new student and Ginny. I've got a little quote here to kind of represent what this persona, that embodies this persona. And then beneath this, I've got some more information about, you know, where she was born, how old she is, her siblings, what her passions are. And then we can really flesh this out more in this section below. So we've got this free text section here where we can insert information about her goals, and the environments that she works in. And we've got a few prompting questions there to help you along the way. You can see below here, we've got these fields, these importance to persona fields. So high, medium, and low. And what this is doing, we want to be able to communicate to the rest of our team what this persona really cares about, what they value, what they think is important, and what we should be prioritizing before anything else. And I'll show you how that kind of translates onto the user story map. I'm going to jump back onto our user story map. And in our filters section, we open this drawer. You can see that we can filter on both the epic level, so this backbone across the top, and we can also filter on our issue level, so down here. So what I'm going to do is filter on that issue level. I want to understand what are all of the stories we've scheduled into sprint 1 that are going to impact Ginny, the new student persona. So we've got this personas drop down. I'll click on Ginny. And you can see that I've hidden 6 issues. So I can see these issues here. These all relate to my new student persona. Now, what I might be interested in understanding is what of these stories are the most important to Ginny? What should I be prioritizing above things that say might be of lesser importance to her? So we've got this importance to persona section. I'm going to click on that. And I want to understand what the high importance stories are for Ginny. So I'm going to click on that. And we can see those issues here. And I can see that I've actually filtered more of my stories out, and I've got this high importance issue sitting in sprint 2. And that might be an indication, provided my team has capacity and we understand the complexity by estimating this work, is I might actually decide to schedule that into a higher sprint and focus on, providing the most value to my personas. So I'm going to go ahead and just clear those filters so that we can see our story map again. I might have noticed that I've actually got some issues, like these quickly create new stories. They didn't service Ginny, our new student, and they weren't of high importance. So I might actually be interested in moving those into a subsequent sprint. And what that does on my backlog, that also moves those issues into the second sprint. So it's all got that one-to-one mapping. So the story map is a really good way to get this view of our user journey along the top via our epics and get a really clear understanding of what are the stories that we're doing in service of those customer journey steps. Who are we servicing by looking at what those personas are, and of what importance of the work we're delivering are those stories to those personas. So it's a really visual way of identifying that, and something that becomes really tricky to be able to identify just looking at a view like this. So at a very high level, that is Easy Agile user story maps and the power of using personas alongside the story map too. So I'm going to hand it back to Sean.
Great, thanks, Teagan. Michael, I think we might have some time for some Q&A now on story maps and personas.
All right, awesome. Thanks very much. That was very informative. And yeah, team, if you'd like to drop some questions into the Q&A, we'll certainly surface those and so we can get some answers. Because yeah, I've got a couple of questions. Because I guess from design industry's experience, we come across a very wide range of organizations, and I'd say that their agile maturity varies greatly. So what I'm interested in is trying to understand what triggers that conversation within an organization, and maybe for an organization that's not so mature versus one that's mature enough, they're really, really trying, and then how do they get it over the line to be able to take this next level, to be able to, because I think a lot of organizations aren't necessarily really using personas. Some, I think, are trying to use stories, but yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Who'd like to answer that one?
Yeah,
thinking.
Keen to hear Teagan's thoughts as well, but just some of those trigger points, Michael, that I can think of is when teams want to take these agile practices off the wall and from a manual physical process to that digital process. And what we find is there's this frustration where this crossover between the physical and then the digital tools actually is a little bit like Chinese whispers. Sometimes you all get into a room and you agree, this is our plan, but then everyone gets back to their desk and opens Jira and just starts working on whatever's next in the backlog or whatever they were working on last week. So there's a little bit of disconnect when you do your planning, you do your user story mapping or your sprint planning in a physical room, or maybe using a digital tool that's not Jira. But then if the team day to day is using Jira, there's this kind of miscommunication. People aren't sure what to work on next. So what we find with our customers is that it's hugely beneficial to do their planning, their sprint planning and their story mapping in Jira, and to, like Teagan said, have that one-to-one mapping with the issues and the stories and the tasks that had already been created in Jira, because then it's referring to the same Jira key. When they go to pick up and say, what are we going to work on next? The plan's there. And what we find is that people like software developers are using the user story map just as much as our product owners, just as much as our Scrum Masters, because it's actually vital to know what the plan is, what are we going to work on next? And you just don't get that with the physical experience. Teagan?
Yeah, well, if I could just interject before Teagan goes, because you're just, it was popping into my mind, prioritization for teams, how do we sort, how do we agree what we're going to do as a priority, and then for whatever reason it doesn't translate into actually what's completed in sprint. And I think a lot of organizations struggle. Sorry, Teagan.
No, that's a big part, and I think whether you're a team with very you're starting out your agile transformation and you're trying to build that agile maturity, or if you're a team with very high agile maturity, all teams want clarity around what it is that they're doing and how it ladders up to something bigger. Trying to see the forest from the trees, basically, in the backlog. And whether you're actually you're doing the agile practice of story mapping or not, the story map's a really great and simple tool to get started. One, because it's just, it automatically takes what you've got in your backlog and visually tries to make sense of it by giving you that third layer. And so you might not be using it for story mapping to begin with, but at least you're starting to get what that narrative is about how what you're working on is laddering up to something bigger. And you might not necessarily, start off in story mapping. The agile practice of story mapping might come as a result of using the story map over time, just by virtue of some of the thought leadership or the tools and the tips and tricks that we provide in our app. We've certainly seen that a lot of our customers use the story map purely as a sprint planning and execution tool to begin with, and then transition themselves to using it for the practice of story mapping when a new project comes along or they're kicking off a new product idea. But yeah, definitely everyone just wants clarity around what it is they're doing and what it's laddering up to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because it's all about having everybody on the same page. And we've got a question in the chat, which is all about getting everyone on the same page. Is, can the story maps be exported? Because you might have third parties, or you might have seniors that you might want to prepare something for.
Yeah, so the story map can be exported to Excel or saved as an image and shared today. For other teams in the business, for example, who might be using Jira, but who may not necessarily ever, look at your board or come to your story map, we've introduced a new feature which is called saved views. So you can actually save different filter combinations to provide a slimmed down version of your story map. If you're focused on, say, here's all of the work in progress we have for the new student persona, and say your marketing team is interested in understanding what's coming down the pipeline because they want to align their comms, you can share the link directly to that slimmed down version of the view, so that they can see, what it is that you're working on, when it will be delivered. But that is on the basis that they're also in Jira, but for those who aren't, export to Excel and save as image.
Okay, yeah, all right, thanks very much. And I guess, final question, is the configuration effort to put this in, is there any? I mean, it looks like we can just install the software, but is there anything that needs to be done underneath?
So for the story map itself, nothing today. Installing the app will automatically put the user story map icon in your project sidebar, and clicking on that will visualize in that 3D way whatever you have existing on your backlog today. The only configuration comes when you want to pair story maps with personas. So we introduced 2 new custom fields when personas is installed. So the persona and importance to persona. And you need to ensure that those fields are on the screens being used by your projects. But apart from that, that's the only configuration that's required.
It's pretty light configuration, so that's good. All right, cool. All right, so perhaps we'll move on to the next product you want to tell us about.
Great, thanks, Michael. So the next Agile ceremony that we're going to talk about is PI planning, which stands for Program Increment Planning. And this ceremony is something that is unique for teams who are looking to scale up their Agile efforts. So PI planning sessions, these are regularly scheduled events that are held throughout the year where multiple agile teams come together and they do their planning for the next quarter. So it's when multiple agile teams within the same agile release train, which is a collection of teams, meet to align themselves to a shared vision. They discuss the features they want to work on, they plan their roadmap for the quarter, and they also work to identify cross-team dependencies. And our product on the Atlassian Marketplace that pairs with this agile practice is called Easy Agile Programs for Jira. So Easy Agile Programs for Jira helps your teams run PI planning directly in Jira. So if you're adopting SAFe or Scaled Agile framework for the first time, there's a lot of different scaling agile frameworks and methods out there. But if you've chosen one, let's say that it's SAFe, chances are there'll be some sort of planning ceremony in there. And that's because planning is really important. And we've spoken about that in the context of user story mapping at the team level. But when you can imagine now you're introducing additional teams, it becomes even more important that we're communicating and we're planning effectively. So SAFe, or the Scaled Agile Framework, is a series of guidelines and practices that really are designed to help bring agility into those larger organizations across all the teams and levels of the business. So if today you have one agile team and this team has their own product backlog and they've got sprints and they've got a sprint cycle of 1 to 2 weeks, and then during that iteration, and then you then ship a piece of working software to the customer, well, that changes when you're at a larger organization. So if your company is starting to look more like this, where you have multiple agile teams sprouting out of the corners, it might be time to start thinking about adopting a team of teams approach to agile. And the main reason to consider scaling your agile approach is that what you'll find is teams start to clash, not in a confrontational way or a conflict way, but they'll start overlapping their scope. One team might actually end up waiting on another team to finish their work before that team can start their work. Or we might find that two teams want to access and work on the same code repository at the same time, and that's not feasible. So what Scaled Agile attempts to solve is some of these problems. How do we actually take Agile from the team level and scale it up to the team of teams level? And PI planning, the practice of PI planning, really is at the heart of this and solving problems for those teams. So is this even possible? Is it even possible to do something as complex as PI planning in Jira using a digital tool with hundreds of people? Well, the answer is yes, and we have proof of it because some of our customers who use Easy Agile programs for Jira to run their PI planning have been doing so for many months or even years now. And these customers include brands like AT&T, Siemens, Disney, Boston Consulting Group, the FBI, Prudential, and Vodafone. So there's some pretty impressive names there who've actually chosen to scale up Agile in their organizations using Jira and using Easy Agile programs to facilitate those PI planning discussions. However, because PI planning involves so many people and it can be quite complex, it's never really plug and play. It does require a little bit of organization and thought to rally together those hundreds of people in an organization. So the answer is yes, but there is more. There is more to consider, and especially today. There's more to consider because many of our teams are now distributed and or remote in the times of COVID. So how does that come into play when we think about PI planning? PI planning is another one of those activities or ceremonies that was traditionally done together, all in the one room, hundreds of people in a conference room or a meeting room, locked away for a few days in the same air conditioning. And that's not really something we can do anymore. So why PI planning? Well, PI planning is the first time really that these big companies get their agile teams together in a room or on the same Zoom call and get these teams talking to each other. It sounds a little bit silly, but sometimes these teams don't even know that the other teams exist, especially in these massive organizations like in financial services. So this PI planning ceremony, this is a chance to really nut out these important conversations about who's working on what and what really are the priorities for the feature roadmap. And this is kind of a big deal because when, like we said, when we're touching a code repository or we're touching a system, we really need to know who else is working on it at the same time. And we need to know if we bring one system down, how's that going to impact another system or another team? So PI planning really enables a few key things. It enables communication, it enables visibility of work, and it enables collaboration across teams. And as a result, teams can get things done more effectively, release more features in less time, and hopefully stay on budget. So many companies find that the right rhythm for PI planning is around every 8 to 12 weeks. They'll come together to run PI planning. So normally once every quarter. Some companies like to do this quarterly. Some companies do it a little bit less regularly or more regularly. But generally, you could do one PI planning each quarter, and that seems to be a good routine for a lot of our customers. But the timing and the frequency will depend on how long each program increment is scheduled to last for. So what should a PI planning agenda look like? Well, it might look a little bit different now that you will need to do it on Zoom and using easy agile programs. We can't do it in person anymore at a hotel or a conference room, or at least I think that's very unlikely. But what's really important in this remote setting is it's important to allow time for our teams to have these breakout sessions and not to cram too much screen time into one day. So this example agenda here is a little bit too jam-packed for my liking. What we've actually seen some teams do now is to break PI planning instead of 2 full jam-packed days of planning, maybe spread it out to 3 or 4 half days, and it tends to work a little bit better. So SAFe stands for the Scaled Agile Framework. How does this tie into PI planning? How does this tie into Jira, and how does it tie into easy agile programs for Jira? Well, SAFe is the world's leading framework for scaling agile across the enterprise. And SAFe outlines what should happen at each level of the organization to make sure that scaled agile is going to be successful. And PI planning is really a vital element of SAFe. It's that ceremony, as we said, that brings together representatives from each and every team to work together and decide what we're going to work on next and make a plan. Now, this diagram is a little bit overwhelming, or it can be, but this is all of the things, all of the stakeholders and the processes that flow into SAFe. But what we've done with Easy Agile programs is we're just focusing on this little section here where we have PI planning. So Easy Agile programs for Jira helps with PI planning, setting the program roadmap, and actually mapping dependencies between agile teams. And Teagan's going to show us exactly what that looks like visually in the app in a second. But one thing I did want to mention before handing over to Teagan is through talking to our customers and doing a bit of research around how this impacts remote teams, the number one learning that I've seen out there after talking to our customers is it's really important to make PI planning accessible for everyone on your agile teams. So using COVID or using remote work as an excuse for excluding team members from PI planning is not really good enough. We have the technology, we have apps and tools out there to make it a little bit easier to involve everybody. So there are other factors that are really important that we need to consider in a remote environment, things like time zones and bringing in facilitators to help with PI planning. Maybe we need coaches or more training around Scaled Agile. We can go more into this in the Q&A if that interests you. But the number one thing that I wanted to call out is PI planning must be accessible for everyone on the team. And a great way to actually make PI planning accessible is to be really transparent, is to build your program board in Jira, is to have all of your work in Jira so everyone can access it. If you do PI planning in Jira using Easy Agile programs, that's where your team is naturally going to work each day. So it makes a lot of sense to make sure that everyone can access the plan. So now for the fun part, I'm going to hand back over to Teagan to give us a walkthrough of Easy Agile programs to see how we can make PI planning easy. Thanks, Teagan.
Thanks, Sean. All right, I'm going to jump straight in. Okay, so as Sean said, the purpose of a PI planning session is really all about visibility and communication. So what we want to do is we want to let all of the teams who belong to an agile release train, which is just a collection of teams who are all working toward a set of shared goals, we want to let them know that each other exist. We want to let them know what each team's role in that quarter is, what they're working towards. And we want to be able to visualize how that work is going to impact the work that our team might be doing, or how our work might impact the work their team is doing. So what we're seeing at the moment, we're looking at what's called a program roadmap. And this is just a timeline. And on this timeline, we can see this blue box here. And this is our program increment. So this is what we're going to achieve at a higher level, at an epic or a feature level, for the next 10 weeks. So you can see that we've got five sprints here. Each sprint is 2 weeks. And we can also see the names of our agile boards that have been included as a part of this program, running down the side here. So one thing to mention is that obviously there is no native concept of a program or a program increment in Jira out of the box. And so they're two primitives that we've introduced into programs. And a really simple way to think about what each of them mean is that a program is a collection of program increments, so iterations, kind of time boxes on a timeline. And a program increment is a collection of teams working in a quarter, or 10 weeks, like we're looking at now, and the goals that they're hoping to achieve over that quarter. So we can see all of the features that have been assigned to our Gryffindor House team here. We can see all of the features our Hufflepuff House team are working on, our Ravenclaw and our Slytherin. So we've got visibility into what those higher level objectives are. And we can also see dependencies running between those features here as well. So anything that is a red dependency is a blocker. And anything that is a yellow is at risk. And anything that is green is of healthy. And I'll explain a little bit more about what those mean when I jump into the increment. So we're looking at this from a very high level, looking at it from a feature level. Now we want to drill into this 10 weeks worth of work and see what each of the teams are actually working on. So we'll click on View Increment. And we've kind of zoomed in now onto this semester one, this 10 weeks worth of work. And so while we can still see all of our teams down the left-hand side here, we can still see what those features are that those teams are working on. But now we can also see the individual stories, tasks, bugs that those teams have scheduled into their sprints. And we're able to identify the dependencies that are running between the teams as well. So something you might notice on this screen is that we've got all of the teams working at the same synchronized cadence. So all of the teams are working within this 5 sprint time box, and all of the sprints have been aligned. And this is a really key principle in SAFe. It's kind of synchronization and cadence are kind of the heartbeat of SAFe. And the reason they're so important is because it's really difficult to understand what the nature or the relationships of dependencies between teams when we're all working on very different cadences. This way, when we say, we need your team to complete this issue by the end of sprint 2, you're all talking about the same date. All of the teams are aligned on what the end of sprint 2 means. So what we can see here, I'm just going to walk through some of those dependency relationships now so you can understand what each of the health means. We're just leveraging the standard blocks is blocked by issue link that comes out of the box with Jira by default. You can configure this to a different link type if that's what you're doing internally, but out of the box, that's what we'll use. So any issues that you've created, a blocks is blocked by link type on the ticket will be visualized as a line, a colored line on the program. So what this is saying here, if we're looking at this green line, it's saying that Hufflepuff House Story 7 depends on Gryffindor House Story 1 to be completed before it can start. Because we've scheduled this story 2 sprints ahead of when we need to start story 7, we're visualizing that dependency as green. It's a healthy dependency. That schedule makes sense. We should be able to get to this work well and truly after this story is being completed. When we're looking at a yellow dependency line, what we're visualizing is that there is a risk. And so we're saying here that Hufflepuff House Story 10 needs Gryffindor House Story 4 to be completed before it can be started. And because they've been scheduled into the same sprint, we're visualizing to our product owners, to our Scrum Masters, to our development teams, that there's a risk that this might cause an issue. So if I was the product owner for the Gryffindor House team, I'd want to make sure that my team is scheduling this work first to make sure that we don't block our Hufflepuff team. And if I was the product owner of the Hufflepuff House team, I'd be scheduling that work last, if feasible, to ensure that we give the Gryffindor House enough time to make sure that dependency is mitigated. And finally, and most scarily, we have got our red dependency lines. And so these dependencies are our blockers. So we're saying here that Hufflepuff House Story 4 needs Gryffindor House Story 3 to be completed before it can be started. And because it's been scheduled 2 sprints after we're due to start and finish this work, we're raising that as a blocker. And so Easy Agile Programs provides a way for teams to mitigate those dependencies on the team planning board. So I'm going to bring in my Gryffindor House team so I can visualize those dependencies again. And by having a conversation with those team members and by moving stories around, we can see that the color of those dependency lines actually updates to reflect the new schedule and change the health of those dependencies. So if I go ahead and schedule this story into sprint 1, the same sprint as what our dependent story is, we can see that we have created a risk dependency rather than a blocker dependency. Same as Easy Agile user story maps, we provide ways to actually create stories here as well. And creating dependencies is also really simple as opposed to creating issue links in the backlog. We can do this by drag and drop. So I might say that, you know, my create issue requires this issue to be completed. I would drag and drop one issue on top of another. And we've created 1, the visualization of the line and the color, but 2, also the issue link on the issues in the backlog as well. So again, there's that one-to-one mapping. Anything we do in Easy Agile Program will be reflected on the team's board in Jira as well. That was a really important consideration because as Sean mentioned around accessibility, we want to make sure that there is a single source of truth, and that source of truth is Jira. Easy Agile Programs is just providing that visualization and visibility across what multiple teams in Jira are doing in a more user-friendly way. So with that being said, again, high level, but also I understand that there's a lot to kind of take in. It is a much kind of larger product than our story maps or personas product because we are looking now at that team of teams level. So I'll hand it back over for any questions.
Thanks very much, Teagan. That's really interesting. So yeah, team, if you'd like to put your questions into the chat, or I think we'll take the mics off mute. You can say hello if you'd like. I guess when I look at that, you know, getting the team of teams harmonized, getting everybody onto the same page, I think from what I see out in industry, we do see a lot of non-standardization between teams, the way they're practicing. And I was actually thinking, looking at that this would be a really good way to drive that conversation about aligning the cadences, aligning the processes and the practices. Because unfortunately, a lot of organizations aren't having that team-to-team conversation. So it ends up in a scenario where the left hand isn't talking to the right hand. So what kind of support is required. It sounds like it's going to need executive support, it's going to need platform owner support, you're going to need your team leader support, there's going to need to be training. This is kind of it, but SAFe is a big step, isn't it? Scaled Agile, everyone's on this Agile maturity roadmap, and this is getting to the top of the mountain. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you're spot on, Michael. I think that the risk is if you try and introduce a new way of working by yourself without bringing all of the teams along with you, it ends up being a little bit chaotic. And we've seen in the past that it just doesn't work. So the power of easy Agile programs is when you have every team on that Agile release train, all planning their work and mapping dependencies together using the one tool. So the risk is if you try and introduce something like this into your organization without doing the hard work of that internal communications piece, getting the executive team on board, getting the stakeholder buy-in, then it's really not going to work, because Scaled Agile relies on all of those teams contributing, all of those teams being transparent, and all the teams communicating their priorities, so we can actually have a chance of mapping all the dependencies. Because if one of your teams opts out and it ends up being one of those red dependencies with that team and we don't know about it, it's going to be a showstopper. Systems are going to go down, and it's actually a big financial risk for any organization by not having all teams of teams priorities mapped and transparent and available for everyone to see.
So would you say that this is an approachable way just to go to Scaled Agile? Because I think it frightens a lot of, because they're going, we're not really fully agile. How do we scale this? No. This seems like, go on.
Yeah, I just in your last question as well, we typically don't see, organizations who are really happy with the way things are progressing look to the Scaled Agile framework. There's usually this tipping point of the burning bridge where new competitors come into the landscape that's really disrupted their market, and they're not able to keep up. They're seeing really high employee turnover, and a lot of the time it's because they're not able to visualize how many dependencies there are on those centralized teams, and the work for them to deliver is just totally unrealistic. And so SAFe provides a way to actually visualize that to leadership and actually break those teams up into smaller parts. But also when looking at easy Agile programs, yes, it's designed for those teams adopting SAFe and doing PI planning, but where easy Agile is a really good example of a company who uses programs to plan across multiple teams for 6 weeks at a time, who's not adopting, this heavy, hardcore Scaled Agile framework. For us, it's just a really great tool to be able to visualize to all of the teams in the business what the higher level initiatives that each team is biting off, and whether we need any support or have any dependencies on the other teams that we're working alongside. So yes, it does definitely require some level of Agile maturity in that we're all working on the same cadence and 6-week cycle. But we're not adopting SAFe and getting some really great benefits out of just being able to visualize what multiple teams are doing at any given time.
Well, I think it's going to depend on your scale, because I'm thinking some of these corporations and thousands of people and trying to progress on this agile journey, and obviously having conversations all the time, but about how they've siloed their teams and isolated their teams, and they can't even share capacity across teams. They can't they can't move work. They kind of don't work with each other. They're in their little silo. So I'd say this is a really good opportunity to get everybody on the same page. So any questions from the audience on programs? Who's ready for Scaled Agile, and what's stopping us? Because I think, as Teagan pointed out, I think it's a big frustration of a lot of staff is some of the digital tools that they're working with, and the pressure that they get put under because decisions are made with incorrect visibility into things like capacity or true visualization onto deadlines and things like that. And yeah, to be able to operate at scale efficiently and be able to, yeah, reduce your waste and reduce your stress sounds fantastic. So look, that's been super informative. I hope our audience enjoys this. Yeah, so thanks very much, Sean and Teagan from Easy Agile. And yeah, I guess to the audience, let me assure you that every organization is on their agile journey, and let's just say there aren't so many that are doing an amazing, awesome, incredible job. There's always heaps of room for improvement, and to be honest, a lot of organizations are really struggling to get it glued in. So yeah, these look like tools that can really make a difference to accelerate that journey, because yeah, clock's ticking. So thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy your day. Yeah, absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thank you.